Right, this is a copy of the book by Abdul Baha, Some Answered Questions. We published this ourselves. It can be purchased as a hard copy on Amazon, and we're supposed to have a free PDF of the whole book also available online at our web pages. Also, this edition of the book is the original 1908 English translation that was published. And you can find that translation online for free in like the Google archive that still has this manuscript. So we were in the process of publishing some answered questions. And while we were doing that, it came to our attention that the mainstream Sans Guardian group that occupies the Bahai International properties in Haifa, Israel, and Wilmette, Illinois, here in the United States, and various other Bahai places around the world, had also decided to republish some answered questions. This was in the year 2014. And when they did this, they took a prophecy of Abdul Baha out of the translation that they made into English in Abdul Baha's explanation of the book of Revelation, chapter 11. And in that explanation, he mentions that the fifth angel that's spoken of in the book of Revelation is fulfilled by Ali, who's the establisher of the Prophet Muhammad. And then he relates the sixth angel to Kuzuz, the establisher of the manifestation of God, the Bab. And then Abdul Baha goes on to explain the prophecy of the seventh angel. And this is what it says in the original text. He quotes the verse from the book of Revelation, and he says, "And the seventh angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever." And then Abdul Baha explains, the seventh angel is a man qualified with heavenly attributes, who will arise with heavenly qualities and character. All right. Voices will be raised so that the appearance of the divine manifestation will be proclaimed and diffused. In the day of the manifestation of the Lord of Hosts, and the Lord of Hosts refers to Baha'u'llah, and at the epoch of the divine cycle of the Omnipotent, which is promised and mentioned in all the books and writings of the prophets, in that day of God, the spiritual and divine kingdom will be established. So here we see that this future prophecy made by Abdul Baha of the coming of a man with heavenly qualities and spiritual character will have the mission of establishing the divine kingdom upon the earth. And in the book Baha'u'llah and the New Era, in explaining the last date prophecy in the book of Daniel, chapter 12, for the 1335 evening and mornings, Abdul Baha's tablets make it clear that this refers to 1335 solar years from the victory of the Prophet Muhammad at Bahai on April 21st of 628 AD, and we add 1335 solar years, brings us to Rizwan period of 1963 AD, the centenary of the first Rizwan of Baha'u'llah in the garden outside of Baghdad, Iraq in 1863. So this date, 1963, was a prophesied date that was given by Abdul Baha and recorded in Baha'u'llah and the New Era. The Pilgrim's Notes and other documents from Shoghi افندی indicate that he had announced the conclusion of the second epoch of the formative age to take place in 1963 in anticipation of the appearance of the seventh angel, who is to be one of the great apostles of Baha'u'llah and the establisher of the Bahai Faith, the way Ali was the establisher of the Prophet Muhammad, and Kuzuz was described by Abdul Baha as the sixth angel, the establisher of the Bab, that the Bahais were anticipating this promised one to arrive to be the establisher of the Bahai Faith. So in that day of God, in other words, 1963, The spiritual and divine kingdom will be established, and the world will be renewed, and a new spirit will be breathed into the body of creation. The season of the divine spring will come, the clouds of mercy will reign, the sun of reality will shine, the life-giving breeze will blow, the world of humanity will wear a new garment, the surface of the earth will be a sublime paradise, mankind will be educated, wars, disputes, quarrels, and malignity will disappear, and truthfulness, righteousness, peace, and the worship of God will appear. Union, love, and brotherhood will surround the world, and God will rule forevermore, meaning that the spiritual and everlasting kingdom will be established. Such is the day of God. For all the days have come and gone were the days of Abraham, Moses, and Christ, or of the other prophets. But this is the day of God, for the Son of Reality will arise in it with the utmost warmth and splendor. And that's Abdul Baha's original prophecy from the 1908 English translation of some answered questions, which is on page 66 of this original edition. So this is a very important prophecy of Abdul Baha, and it has to do with the fact that when Shoghi Effendi passed on in London in 1957, there was still 6 more years of the second epoch of the formative age to continue. And Shoghi Effendi had already set up the Universal House of Justice on January 9th of 1951 with Abdul Baha's Agsan's son, Mason, as the president of this. And this was going to become an officially recognized Bahai International World Court by the State of Israel in 1963 through a Bahai courts law. And had all this happened, the troubles in the Middle East and all around the world, and including Russia and the Ukraine today, and the United States and NATO moving toward Eastern Europe, these things would have been ameliorated. Also, the hijacking of the Bahai international offices at the United Nations means that the people at the United Nations aren't getting the actual guidance from the flow of the covenant that comes down to us, to our generation in the first century of the covenant, from the passing of Abdul Baha in 1921 to these years now after 2021. So by separating themselves from the authentic Universal House of Justice and Abdul Baha's son, the Agsan, that was the president, they missed out on the third epoch of the formative age, the fourth epoch of the formative age, and now we've just completed the second epoch of the golden age. Well, in this prophecy, they removed it. And this is what they changed it to. They still quote the book of Revelation. And the seventh angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. Then they write, that angel refers to human souls who have been endowed with heavenly attributes and invested with an angelic nature and disposition. So, of course, this is the Baha'i definition of an angel. In Abdul Baha's tablets, he says, you are all the angels, that the Baha'is are souls who are endowed with heavenly attributes and invested with an angelic nature and disposition. All the Baha'is have this disposition. We're all members of one holy household. From the line of King David comes Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha, and the presidents of the House of Justice continue the House of David. And this is because Bahai is the 12 tribes of Israel under its new name Bahai, representing a prophecy of all the people of the world being one family. So we're all angelic in this way. But one thing angels won't do is alter their holy books. Ooh, so you can see what they've done here. Abdul Baha says, the seventh angel is a man qualified with heavenly attributes who will arise with heavenly qualities and characters. In other words, he's a man amongst the Baha'is, since he said we're all the angels, who specifically fulfills the prophecy for the coming of the seventh angel in 1963, who will establish the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven, because he knows that the word kingdom means a king over a domain. making Baha'u'llah that great King of Kings, seated upon the throne of King David that the whole world is waiting for. This separation from the true house of justice and the separation of the people from the executive branch of the house of justice that continues the throne line of David in the descendants of Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha, and his son, his grandson, and today's great-grandson, and so on ad infinitum for the rest of the life of the planet, is a horrible, a grievous error that the people made when they separated from this. But the progress is going forward. In fact, our progress of getting the truth of the covenant out to the people, and the fact that Baha'u'llah in his proclamation states that the ancient beauty ruleth upon the throne of King David, thus hath my pen spoken that which the histories of bygone ages have related, that this is a historical fact, it's a religious fact, it's a prophetic fact. In some answered questions, Abdul Baha says again that Baha'u'llah fulfills the prophecy from Isaiah, the root and the branch, because it refers to the throne line of King David continuing. In God Passes By, Shoghi Effendi mentions Baha'u'llah is seated upon the throne of King David. This is all throughout the Baha'i literature, and it's the center of the covenant. So we can recognize the true universal house of justice from fakes, frauds, and imitations. That there'll be some person in the community who's entitled the branch amongst the believers, as mentioned in the Nowruz prayer, when we break the fast and say, we have broken our fast today, O Lord, ourselves and amongst us the man whose name is the branch. And this is just another equal believer. So the seventh angel is a true Baha'i who remained firm in the covenant. He was born in the heroic age in 1914. His parents met Abdul Baha. His parents on his mother's side met Abdul Baha. He's a third generation Baha'i. And when Abdul Baha passed on in 1921 and the people attacked Shoghi Effendi and abandoned the will and testament, he made a vow, and he said to God that he would always stay firm in the covenant and defend the guardianship, the true house of justice. And then when Shoghi Effendi had passed on, he was able to see, like he'd seen with Mirza Yahya, Baha'u'llah, and Muhammad Ali and Abdul Baha, and Shoghi Effendi and his parents and his brothers and his sisters, that in the Bahai faith, there seems to be trouble in the Holy Family, in the Holy Household, and that we have to use the documents that are written and signed, sealed, and stamped by the founders, Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha, to use our intellect and the independent investigation of the truth to see through the test. So when Mirza Yahya opposes Baha'u'llah, we go by the Holy Writ, and Baha'u'llah is he whom God shall make manifest. Passing the test is as easy as falling off a log. When Muhammad Ali separated from Abdul Baha and created a trouble where you couldn't tell who was to blame one way or the other, the Kitabiyad shows us that Abdul Baha is the successor. And then we could see through Muhammad Ali's immature temper tantrums and childish machinations. We also stuck with Shoghi Effendi when we use our intellect, and his family fell away. There were only 3 members of the Holy Family left alive in 1957. Shoghi Effendi, his uncle Abdul Baha's son, Mason Agsan, and his wife, Ria Khanum. And when Shoghi Effendi passed on, there were 2 members of the Holy Family left. The liaison officer of the House of Justice, his wife, Ria Khanum, and his uncle, Abdul Baha's son, Mason Rimi Agsan, the president of the Universal House of Justice. Those 2 should have called a meeting of the UHJ, and this would have been fine. And it would have been accepted by the Israeli state court in 1963, and the world would have been on a different trajectory than it is now. But this stuff was prophesied of in the tablet of the Holy Mariner, that there'd be a horrendous violation of the covenant. If Mason Rimi is the person who broke the covenant, then there isn't a horrendous violation of the covenant, because the majority of people live in the mainstream Baha'i world and are building temples and shrines and having meetings and doing what they do. They're not suffering. There's no calamity in their world. And if Mason Rimi was the violator, well, he's never been heard of or seen of again. So what's the problem? If, on the other hand, the majority of people were misled and they mistakenly followed Ria Khanum instead of the other member of the Holy Family, Mason Remy. It's just the same mistake people made when they were tricked by Mirza Yahya and then realized it and came back and accepted Baha'u'llah. Mirza Yahya's own son, who he appointed to be his successor, went to the Holy Land and accepted Abdul Baha and was a Bahai. So this happens in the faith. The first 100 years of the faith demonstrate these things. So the changing of this verse and some answer questions kind of tells you who's up to no good here. And it's the people who have changed these words. They changed it from the seventh angel is a man who will come to that angel refers to just human souls in general, removing an explicit prophecy from Abdul Baha about the coming of the promised one that would establish the Bahai Faith. And he was successful in his mission. And I met him in 1985 and helped him establish or reestablish the IBCUHJ on January 9th of 1991. It was the 40-year anniversary of when Shoghi Effendi constituted the first one, and it was prophesied to happen like that. And we didn't know it was 40 years to the day until after the fact that it had happened. And so since that time, we've had the Universal House of Justice in full functioning working order since 1991, all the way till now, which is 31 years. And we've had a wonderful, successful teaching effort with being able to promote the covenant of peace that this is all really about. This is not a religious dispute. If people think this is a religious dispute or whatever they think this is, that's not what's going on. Baha'u'llah was the first human being in world history to announce as a manifestation of God on behalf of God that war is illegal. He said conflict and strife are forbidden, a rigid prohibition in the book. And then he said the people of the world could elect a supreme tribunal so they could settle their differences without warfare. Those who've been breaking this covenant have been on the side of preventing us getting the covenant of justice and peace out for the people to know about it. And there've been like different problems happening during the 100 years to get this out. Well, it was imitated in the World Court, the League of Nations, and the UN, and these have failed. But in 1928, out of Chicago, where the American Bahai National Center is in Wilmette, Illinois, they were able to start the outlawry movement. And in 1928, the nations of the world, including Russia and the United States and England and France, and this includes the Ukraine, agreed to the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which is the 1928 World Peace International Covenant. And this is, the nations are bound by this covenant of peace in 1928. We're coming up to the 100-year anniversary of that in 2028. And this is what the Baha'is have been doing. This is a revelation directly from God through Baha'u'llah at the time that we have the communication revolution with the internet now and computers, that we can elect the Supreme Tribunal correctly and not the wrong way that the World Court was formed didn't work. The imitation at the League didn't work. The UN didn't work. And this headless thing on Mount Carmel that's changing the holy writings, or maybe other suspicious activity with the writings people mentioned earlier today, is also an imitation. So we're not going to have peace on earth or the lesser peace or anything like this until all the people of the world realize we've already entered into an international covenant of peace in 1928, and we're all in violation of this covenant when there's war. That we have to rededicate ourselves to every single provision of the 1928 covenant of peace. And for Baha'is, that means that rededicating themselves to the 1921 covenant of every single provision of the Master's sacred will and testament. So yes, this changing of the verse in some answered questions is obvious and egregious in English. I'm sure you guys have a Persian or Arabic copy, and you can go back and hopefully find the original in the Persian, and maybe that hasn't been changed, so you can find an older printed edition. We've been dealing with this here in the United States ever since 1957 and 60. We're very careful about the books that we get. We try to get them everything printed before the passing of Shoghi Effendi and things like this. And we accept some of these other publications as provisional translations, but we can't base our authority and our weight and our belief and our life on suspicious documents. So we also still have the original copy of the Will and Testament printed before 1957. To my knowledge, the Will and Testament has not been altered, at least all the way up to through the 1990s. So I guess this is a problem for the people. But what this is about is electing the supreme tribunal that'll bring peace to the earth. And the Bahai covenant is the preserving and shelter and the repository of divine guidance, preserving this mechanism through which all the people of the world can establish the lesser peace on earth, and we can have a golden age of civilization. And removing these prophecies was a response to how successful the truth of the coming of the seventh angel and the true house of justice with the guardian as its president would be, this coming of the promised one. And today, April 29th of 1971, was the day that his proclamation was made, when he had the stone with seven eyes before him in Deer Lodge, Montana. And so the ninth day of Rizwan has always been a very holy day. And Baha'u'llah also prophesied in the Octas that on this day, the one with the gospel would come forward. Some people thought this might be the Bab, but he never did anything on April 29th. But April 29th, 1971, is the gospel, is the good news of the kingdom, which is the meaning of the word Christ, from the Greek word Christos and the Hebrew word Messiah, which in English means anointed one. It's a title, the Messiah ben David, the anointed male sperm descendant of King David. So today we have Baha'u'llah. He's a Jew being descended from the tribe of Judah and the throne line of King David. So he's Jewish. He's raised in Islamic culture. He was a Muslim by upbringing and religion, so he's Islamic. And he fulfills prophecy for the second coming of Christ, a descendant of King David that will come, that the Christians are waiting for. So he's a Christian. He's a Jewish Christian Muslim. This is what the world needs today.